Let's get started. As Sarita said, bienvenidos a todos. So excited to welcome you all to Gran Combo, the nonfiction edition. I am Angela Maria Spring. I am the owner of Duende District, which is one of the 5 amazing stores that are helping bring you here. But I really want to give a special thank you to Word Up Bookstore that it's their brainchild and they have done amazing things. I know working with Angie and everybody, and I'm so excited to see everybody here. I'm so excited to see so many familiar people I won't say familiar faces, but it's chat. So yeah, we're so excited. Just a quick overview of who Duende District is. We are a collaborative pop-up bookstore for and by people of color, where all are welcome. The cornerstone of the Duende Project is about the collective, the community, and creation and decolonization of literary spaces by and for people of color. So please visit us at duendedistrict.com to find out more about our pop-up boutiques and our events. And you can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Duende District. And I am going to pass it on to our next bookstore, Q and Willow.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vina Castillo. I am co-owner of Q and Willow Books, and we are located in Kew Gardens, Queens. We are a crowd-funded and woman-owned bookstore. Can you guys hear me? I didn't know if that went through. You can, okay. We have been open for 4 years in October, and we're very excited to be here. And we want to thank everyone for supporting our bookstores during this very tough year, and you're the reason that we're still around. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it to Veronica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Veronica Santiago Liu from Word Up Community Bookshop, but I'm going to read a little something from Loyalty Bookstores, who is one of the 5 amazing bookstores that is putting this event together, but they couldn't be with us tonight because they have so many other things going on. So Loyalty Bookstores is a Black queer-owned bookstore with 2 locations in the Petworth neighborhood of Washington, D.C. and downtown Silver Spring, Maryland. Loyalty focuses on lesser known as well as best-selling books by queer, by POC, and other marginalized authors. And Hannah Oliver Depp and Christine Ballo would be here if they could be, but welcome you all as well. Thanks. And I will pass it on now to Mil Mundos.
Hi, I'm Sarita Gonzalez from Mil Mundos Bookstore. Our main store is in Bushwick, but we have a pop-up in Essex in Manhattan. We are a bilingual bookstore and community center that curates to celebrate Latinx, Black, and Indigenous heritage. Thank you so much for coming today. Please know that the authors in this room are my living ancestors, and their books are on my altar behind me. Go Team Memoir. I'm going to pass it on to Carolina.
Hi everyone, I'm Carolina. I'm from Word Up Bookshop, and thank you for coming. This is awesome. I'm so excited for this event. If you don't know about Word Up, we're a bookshop and art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers. We can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street in Washington Heights, New York. And we host events for all ages and sell used and new books in English and Spanish. You can check out our website at wordupbooks.com, where Emmanuel/DJ Boy will be processing all those orders. So if you ever want to annoy him, just place a lot of orders. And yeah, before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that continue adding all your comments in the chat panel. And if you can't access that, you can click the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, just so they don't get lost in the chat. And yeah, I'm very excited to pass it on to Angie Cruz and Ariana Davis that will be moderating the event today.
Angie, you're muted. Oh, a rookie mistake. I'm so happy to be here. I just want to warn everyone that my technology is very bad where I'm at right now. I'm in the woods, and I'm so happy Ariana Davis, the author of What Would Frida Do, is here to help me and co-host this event, this very important historical event. And thank you to the booksellers and Veronica for always I don't know, entertaining my wild ideas about how we can build community. This week especially, I feel like the news really has been hard to hear what's going on in India, Colombia, and Palestine, to our brothers and sisters. And I think about how important it is that we keep nurturing community and building coalition among us, especially across our different communities that share similar goals, and the ways that book bring us together even make this event even more significant, I think, in this historical moment. So thank you so much for facilitating it, Ariana. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm so excited to have all my hermanas, Jaquira Díaz, Jen de Leon, Daisy Hernandez, Maria Hinojosa, and wait, I'm missing someone on the window. Why can't I see you here? I don't see everyone. My computer, what's wrong with it? Anyway, here we are. I'm very, very excited. Quiara Alegria Hudes, there you are, Hudes. I'm so excited to have you all here and just have a conversation among our community about things that matter to us and why your books are so important to us right now. So I thought it would be fun, you know, that we tie in all the questions to the titles of your books. And I wanted to start with Jen de Leon. Jen de Leon, you wrote a book called White Space. And if I was at home, I would be sharing the book because it has such a cool cover. And what I wanted to talk about is how you wrote this essay collection where you're talking about how you've negotiated white space throughout your life. And I'm curious, like, what was the essay or a moment or experience that you had negotiating white space in whatever way you want to think about it, that kind of prompted you to build on this collection and pull this together?
Thank you so much, Angie. I love your amazing ideas, and thank you for creating this space. I'm looking at everyone out on the screen. This feels like a dream, but it's not a dream, it's real life. And I'm grateful to share the screen with you all right now. And thank you to all the bookstores who are hosting us and lifting up our stories. White Space is an essay collection where I do explore the white spaces of my life that I've been a part of from a child all through now as a university professor, and the ways that I've learned to take up space within these communities. But it's also about the white space of the page specifically, and how I've really had to kind of come into my own and my identity as a writer and an author, and elbow my way, you know, in the page, on the page, in the document, and really take up that space. The moment that I think the book, I guess the origin story or the seed, the genesis, comes from a night on Thanksgiving years ago. I had spent the whole day there with my family, and on my way out, my dad asks me for help because he's going to apply to a temp agency and he needed help writing a resume. And at the time he was 57, he'd never had a resume in his whole life, and he just casually asked me to help him write it. And it was through helping him write the resume that it was really a metaphor. The whole thing was an exercise in getting to know him and his life, and filling up, you know, what do you put under personal information, under education, under work experience? And what happened is there was a ton of white space physically on the page, just visually. And it kind of killed me, but at the same time, I realized that there's so much in that white space. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to go back to Guatemala and move there. I was born in the States, but I wanted to live there and really experience the country where both my parents were born and raised, in a way that I couldn't if I were visiting for a week or 2 weeks. And so that's what the collection is really about. It's about going to Central America, living there, and improving my Spanish, learning about the history of this country, and really getting to know more about my parents and all that fills that white space.
You know, Jen, while you were speaking, I started thinking about how I've, you know, because one of the big things I've been thinking about a lot is negotiating white spaces and not allowing like the erasure of who I am in those spaces, like really being fully expressing myself in those spaces. And I started thinking, Maria, I don't know if you remember this, but back in 1998, Daisy, you might have been there. It was at the Will Women in Literature and Letters conference that I organized back in 1998. Maria was invited to speak on journalism, and she showed up with her baby inside of a carrier and talked to us for an hour and a half about the struggle you were having to tell the stories that mattered to you while working at CNN, I think it was. I don't remember where you were working, but you were literally talking to us about how you were negotiating. How can we keep telling our stories and you expressing yourself? So now that I'm thinking of it, I thought maybe we could just like, maybe you remember that and you could talk about your, how you've been negotiating those things too.
You know what's fun? First of all, it's great to be here. I do think that this is historic. And to my fellow writers, what's up? And to my girlfriend, Quiara, so proud of you. It's great to be with you. And yeah, we should have all been dancing to Juan Luis Guerra together. I mean, I'm just saying, that was fun. And to the booksellers, I can't wait to get out there and to see you. And please invite me so I can come out to the hood and see y'all. I miss people. So here is my response. I'm like, wow, okay, how can I say this? It's not going to sound really terrible. I feel very blessed because I created Futuro Media and therefore really kind of took control of the situation. By the way, it was terrifying. I was scared the whole time. But most of my days, I'm not negotiating white spaces. I'm with my staff. My staff is majority women, majority people of color. And we're creating and doing our work. And so I'm not actually, white folks work with us, but they are part of a team of people who have, a vision of the kind of journalism and productions that we want to be a part of. So I think I took that frustration and I remember showing up. I was like, okay, well, this is what it looks like. I just got to show up with the baby. And this is what it looks like. But that frustration led me away from CNN. It led me away from NPR. It led me away from the networks increasingly to the point where I was jumping off the cliff and had to do it on my own, which again, to the booksellers, you've done the same thing. It's terrifying, but I would just say that our ancestors, our female ancestors, our women ancestors have been jumping off of cliffs and doing terrifying things their whole lives. So I'm not sure why we would stop.
Daisy, you were there. You were there in 1998. It's so funny. So I met Daisy Hernandez, the author of The Kissing Bag, back in 1998 when we were still, I was in an MFA, but you were before an MFA.
Many years before an MFA.
TV writer and
I was starting out as a journalist. And yeah, I remember Maria, that was such an important and illuminating talk. I still remember exact lines from it actually. It was just, I think for me, it was the first time I was seeing a Latina journalist and you were in your totality, ¿verdad? Como mamá, como periodista, as a woman, as a feminist. Yeah, so it was amazing. Thank you, Angie. Yes, yet again. I feel like I come to these events and I'm always like, thank you, Angie, for having the vision. We're willing to follow. But I do remember that was, I just can't believe it was that long ago. That's kind of crazy, but.
It is kind of crazy. Well, since we're with you, Daisy, why don't we talk about The Kissing Bug? A true story of a family, an insect, and a nation's neglect of a deadly disease. I know you've been working on this book for a very long time. Doing really a lot of research. And the big question of this book is, who does the United States take care of and who does it leave behind, right? So, how timely is this book? Like, I don't think you planned this when you first started. Could you tell us a little bit about why you started to tell this story?
I think like a lot of my projects, I ended up starting because I was pissed off. And part of the reason I was pissed off was that I was learning more about this disease that I write about, which is called the kissing bug disease or Chagas disease. And I lost a family member to this disease and I knew very little about it. And then as I started researching, I realized, oh, this is actually more prevalent in the United States than the Zika virus, which many of us have heard about and know about. And it's a pretty deadly disease. 1 in 3 people who are infected end up having heart complications, end up dying. And there's 300,000 people in the US, Latinx immigrants specifically, who have this disease. And for me, I love this question about the white space, because the white space in the context of this book was really the medical establishment and public health communities, which have historically been ignoring this disease, because it does disproportionately affect poor, marginalized Latinx migrants, right? So they can, as they have done in many other ways, ignore. So yeah, kind of started from a place of being angry that there wasn't more information for families like mine. So yeah, I ended up 7 years later, there's a book and a lot of interviews, and went all over the country finding patients and doctors and epidemiologists, and just getting more insight too into the fact that medical schools have been ignoring this disease for so many decades. And there are amazing activists like doctor advocates who have been stepping up to raise awareness. And what was crazy about this last year was actually everything that I saw unfold with COVID was sort of all the racial inequities around healthcare are exactly what I saw about this particular disease. So it's been an incredible year in terms of just, I think awareness has changed in the US, but then at the same time, it really hasn't changed very much in terms of what we're seeing now with the vaccine, how much access we have in the US and in other wealthy countries to the vaccine, while many, many other countries, including all of pretty much Latin America, is being left behind. I could go on, but I'll stop.
I mean, what's interesting about this idea of timely is that we're working on our books for many years, and when the books land, they feel timely. Like, I mean, a lot of us have been negotiating all our lives, I guess, like medical racism or sexism in, when we're trying to get treatment for our families in our communities. Does anyone want to share any stories or anecdotes of ways that this feels timely or relevant to you?
It's when you're talking about medical neglect, one of the components of my book, My Broken Language, that isn't but half a page long, but so many people upon reading it have wanted to talk about more, is the history of coerced sterilization on the island, on Puerto Rico, and then of course throughout the nation. In history, more recent than we would like to admit, let alone a deeper history that no one wants to admit either. But people are quite shocked by that, and as I was, for me, it's just a family story. That's it. It's just, my abuela was sterilized in Arecibo in 1954. And, they give all these incentives, and they don't say essentially you're part of a population control program. They don't, in her case, they said it was temporary birth control. And so for me, it's just a family story. But then as more people have reached out to me about that and wanting to connect, wanting to talk, wanting to share their stories and wanting to learn, I have done more research, and it does resonate with, again, the inequities that this pandemic has brought to light once again. It just shows what a deep history we have of these inequities on our bodies in our communities from generation to generation.
Can I just say that as a young woman here in New York in the 1980s, one of the things that just changed my whole life and perspective was a film called La Operación by Ana Maria Garcia, who is in Puerto Rico. As far as I know, she's still there. And it really needs to be brought back. It's called La Operación. And I just remember thinking what a badass she was to do an investigative report, to do a historical report, to do a film, a documentary. And then the horror of the fact that this was happening on the island. And actually, when you peel back, Quiara, there's a story that is waiting to be done that I haven't been able to do. But I heard that La Operación was happening in parts of West Texas, like in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's not like it's disappeared, right?
And yeah, there's current class actions happening right now about coerced and forced sterilizations as recently as 2020 in the United States and Canada.
Quiara, we wanted to ask you about your book, My Broken Language. Ever since I first heard the title of this memoir, I literally just, even the title alone, I feel like says so much. I would love for you to share with everyone what that phrase of My Broken Language means to you and how that came about. And then I would also love to hear from the other panelists what this concept of broken language means to you. Because for me, as a Latina who struggles with their Spanish, it's like that says a lot about both language, but also identity in the sense of belonging. So curious where that idea for the title of the book came from. And then if anyone else wants to chime in with their own stories of broken language and belonging, would love to hear from you.
Sure. So the broken languages, I mean, English is my first language. It is not my mother's first language. It is not my pop's first language. So, you know, whatever, they're very good English speakers, no big deal, right? But I think I became more aware, especially by my adolescence, that the language I was getting better and better and better at, which was English, as I grew to understand myself and my spirit and my family history more, I realized that English really didn't have all of the vocabulary to describe who I was and to tell these stories of who I was. So, you know, and my Spanish is just not as good as my English, you know, so Spanish was very helpful. But then as I'm, you know, trying to work on my Spanish with my elders and talking to my elders, you know, my mother is pointing out to me, well, this is also a colonial language, and pushing me deeper into, she's a Santera, crowned on Django, so pushing me deeper into elements of Yoruba language, elements of Taino language, and dialects. And plus I'm in music, I'm just searching for the right languages to just literally express with accuracy who I am and where I come from and where I want to go. And then at the end of the book, a writing teacher says to me, she changed my life because she said to me, well, if your Spanish is broken, then write your broken Spanish. And I said, like, no, I can't do that. I'm ashamed of that. I can't write the thing I'm ashamed of. She was like, write your broken Spanish. And that set me free. So that's why I put the my in front of the broken, because it's like, it's mine. And I'm trying to claim it and dig deep and let the brokenness still tell a rich narrative.
You know, I just did a conversation with Cecilia Vicuña and Rosa Alcala, who translates Cecilia Vicuña. And I'm saying Vicuña and I'm saying it wrong again. But someone in the chat, they corrected me and said I was saying it incorrectly. And I suffered a little bit of language shame. And Rosa Alcala said that the reason she writes poetry is because of language shame. You know, it goes back to Maria saying, you know, I started my own thing because, you know, the rage, and Daisy saying that where the anger like helps her and propels her to do the work. Like any of you, like, I mean, just like you, Quiara, writing a book to sort of unpack this struggle, right, with language and trying to communicate all that you are to everyone you're with. Anyone else have stories around broken language and language shaming? Hi, Jaquira.
Hi, so I have kind of the opposite thing going on. My first language is Spanish. I feel like in a lot of ways, writing in English for me has been kind of a performance, trying to translate my experiences, because what I speak every day with my family, for example, is Spanish. And it's not even what you would, you know, what some people would call broken Spanish. It's Español bien jíbaro de Puerto Rico. And it's not like I can't go and speak my Español jíbaro because they're not really going to get what I'm saying. So I have to change, like, in a lot of ways, perform something, a different Spanish for them. But I feel often like I write in English, I love English, and yet I live my life more authentically in Spanish when I'm in Puerto Rico amongst my people. I feel like my truest self. That's when I don't feel like I'm performing. That's when I feel like all the layers are peeled back and I'm able to have conversations with people who really truly get what I'm trying to say. And when I'm speaking Spanish, with, let's say, like my stepmom who's Cuban, and I'm talking to her and she's kind of Guajira and she has something similar going on, it feels like having conversations with people who are like working class or have a, you know, like that understands certain things about growing up in poverty and having a different access to language and not having access to academia. It's a different kind of shame, but at the same time, I feel like the shame is not mine. I can speak Spanish. It's someone else's to carry. I'm actually very proud that I speak the way my grandmother spoke to me, the way that she taught me to love language. And I feel like my voice, even my English voice when I'm writing, is made up of, you know, all those people whose languages I am, you know, trying to negotiate. And in writing this book and thinking about the fact that it's going to be translated into Spanish, one of the things that was very important to me, because I don't have the time or, you know, the expertise to actually translate the book, it was very important to me to have a translator who is Boricua, who understands what like Español bien jíbaro is, who understands that it's not just, you know, a book that can be translated for people who live in Spain. It's a book that I want Puerto Ricans to understand and read and appreciate. That it's a language that's actually, you know, that belongs to us, that we created, and that we carry. And so, for me, often, so now my spouse is British, so they speak a different English, and it's kind of hilarious at home when I'm speaking English, and I'm also trying to translate because my domestic language is also Spanish. So I'm like in my head talking about what I'm gonna make and trying to translate, and I'm just like I've gotten to the point where I just tell them what I'm doing in Spanish, and then they're like speaking Español jíbaro, learning Spanish and speaking a very different Spanish. Unlearning the Spanish they learned in Europe because they had Spanish teachers who were from Spain, kind of unlearning that Spanish and learning my Spanish. So it's very, very different. But what I was gonna say is that one of the things that I wish my grandmother was alive to see is that my book will exist in Spanish. And that it's not just in Spanish, but it has Español bien jíbaro.
Thank you for that. That was so. It's interesting because there's the broken language on both sides. Yes, Quiara, thank you for the promo of Ordinary Girls. Mine's behind my ring light. I don't want to like knock it down right now. A few people in the comments were asking me. I was mentioning that I just signed up for. There's a program called Spanish Sin Pena, if anybody has heard of it, and it's basically a program. I believe the founder's called Joine Ramirez. I came across it because I interviewed her for a story that I wrote about my own journey with not speaking great Spanish and how it's like really affected me. And, you know, I've had so much insecurity around it. And the whole idea of her program, which is all virtual right now, is basically just different events, Zooms. They have like happy hours, they have book clubs, and everything it's meant to encourage people to speak Spanish and get better at their Spanish, but in a more relaxed environment where it's not like, you know, just drilling you into your Spanish grammar. So I'm excited to try it out. I wanted to push myself to finally like do something about it and stop just feeling insecure and actually take action. So I'm really grateful that platform exists. Okay, next question is for Maria Hinojosa. Once I Was You, I know I've interviewed you before about the book, and I was such a fan, but one of the things that really stuck with me is this idea that you said to this young girl, once I was you. But I'm curious if anyone has ever said to you, once I was you, if there's ever been someone that you've gotten wisdom or advice from who told you, once I was you, and here's some wisdom or advice for you. And if anyone else also wants to jump in with wisdom that they've gotten from elders, whether it's other artists or writers, some of the best advice that you've ever gotten.
Well, I mean, I talk about my muse. So here goes a flex. My muse is Sandra Cisneros. And so she, and also Quiara. So Sandra, yeah, I know those are serious flexes right there. So Sandra, you know, at first told me very long before we were friends, and before I had written actually, and she just said, you have to write like you're in the kitchen in your pajamas. And I was like, what? She's like, that's how you have to write, in your kitchen, in tus pijamas, con tus pantuflas, that's, and that she told me, boy, that was in the early 1990s. And then apart from reading my dreams on multiple occasions, one of the things that she said to me was, when I think I was already writing Once I Was You, and she said, don't write about the things that you remember, write about the things you wish you could forget, or the things you've already forgotten or you want to forget. And that was how I end up writing the introduction to the book that ends up giving us the title, because unlike Quiara, I didn't have a title. I had no title, and we suffered a lot. And my agent and my editor were like, don't worry, it's going to happen. I was like, it's just never going to happen. And then we brought in somebody who had not read anything, and they read they started with the introduction. And that's when I have this moment where I see a little girl who is being trafficked by the US government. She is Guatemalan. And that's part of what ends up happening in the book, is this kind of moment that I realized that I didn't know this, but that, yeah, there was a moment where I was almost separated from my own mom, even though I came under very different circumstances, with privilege, with a green card, in an airport. But the immigration agents almost took me. So
that line about writing like you're in your pajamas, really, I have a list of like just quotes from different authors that I'm like, when I'm in a writing rut, I'm just like, this is what I'm gonna reference. And I think that that's so important. Is there any other advice anyone in the panel has ever gotten, whether it's about writing or just in life in general, but words of wisdom that have stuck with you from someone who's like, once I was you, and here's how, here's my advice to you?
I mean, I've definitely received the advice of just writing into those questions, into those knots, and using writing as a way to kind of detangle them. I really think about memories as knots, and depending on what part of my life I'm in and what I'm going through in the current time, I can see memories in different ways, and I just try to, like, I don't know, untie them and figure them out. But I was thinking about this conversation about Spanish and how it has this kind of currency. And in my lifetime, right, in all of our lifetimes, like, I think we've been able to see Spanish in different, it's like been a la mode, like in fashion, right? And then it's also been like, no, don't speak with an accent, or, you don't want to be an ESL or an ELL student. You want to test out of that program. Like, don't tell them that you speak Spanish at home, because they're going to put you in this track at school. To the flip side, where your Americano gringo friends are more, they're Spanish. I've had that experience, or my friends are fluent and they speak better Spanish than I did, especially in high school and college. And I did have that shame. I studied French forever. And people are like, oh, that's so nice that you studied French. And the reason I did was because I didn't want to be in Spanish class with my friends and have everybody looking at me like, help me with my homework. And I would be like, no, I can't help you. And it just was like getting too close to the heat, So I'm like, I'll be safe over here in French land where nobody knows. It's just me. And it took me years. I was 28 when I went back to school to study Spanish in Guatemala. And when my first son was born, even though Spanish was my first language, I was 2 by the time I was, speaking in English, and I quickly kind of just adopted Spanglish. I'd make up words like la ketchup or like watchear la tele, and it was kind of fun. And then everybody always made fun of my Spanish growing up. My cousins and my tias were the worst. And it just was something that I think when I gave birth to my oldest son, I did not know that, the moment I delivered him, like the midwife put his body, I write about this in my essays, but she put his slimy body on my chest and I said, te quiero. And it just came out, and I didn't know that I would speak in Spanish, those are the first words I'd say to him. But I think deep down, I didn't want him to hear English. And the doctors were like all over the place, push, and like, well, it's like all this like doctory language. And I'm like, no, I want him to hear his mother speaking Spanish. So anyway, I write about that in mother tongue, but we've talked about that a lot just in this group. And I love hearing everybody's experience with it. But it's crazy how the language can have this currency, right? It's like then people major in it in college and they study abroad and they get these jobs and positions where you have to be bilingual, not just speaking, but writing. And then here you are growing up with the second language. We see it as a deficit, not an asset. And it just is like a total mind fuck, actually, you know, it really is. So then you have your own kids and you have to figure out, how do I want them to embrace 2 languages or 3 or 4? And anyway, I'm glad we're all writing about it in our own ways, because I think it's really important and it makes space for other people to have their feelings and share their stories about this.
I also want to jump on this because I think there's also so many brilliant connections with other communities, other immigrant communities. So language was like really central to my memoir, A Cup of Water Under My Bed. And when that book came out, I got emails from Latinx readers, definitely, but the ones that really surprised me were emails from people who were Korean American, Chinese, Haitian, and they were basically like, that was me. I was interpreting for my parents all the time. That's exactly the kind of love-hate relationship that I had with my native language. It was just amazing. It's just, I think there's so many communities, even beyond the Latinx diaspora, that have these like complicated, messy relationships with that mother tongue. Yeah, it's amazing.
Another thought I would toss in there, I've been thinking about this a lot. I have a chapter on my mom's accent. You know, and I think when we start to talk about Español bien jíbaro or Español de barrio, like, you know, different levels of classism and shame get folded in there. And one of the realizations I had writing the book, it was one of the first chapters I wrote, was like remembering correcting her pronunciation when I was 5, but also, you know, and I didn't know better. And when I was 15 and I fucking knew better, you know, and realizing, and I always did so playfully, you know, where I'd be like, Mom, you know, da da da, and she would never ever change her pronunciation after my correction, and she was a beautiful English speaker. But realizing at this late date, and I think this reverberates a lot with also just general immigration questions of like, whose English is this, right? Because my vibe was always like, well, it's my English, because it's my first language. But I'm like, wait, but I never had to earn it in the same way that she did. And actually what she achieved in her second language, she was opening community centers to get better health outcomes for bilingual moms, Latino moms. She was working the Senate floor in Harrisburg, helping senators, you know, consulting with their legislation in her second language. Like it's actually her English. And I'm the guest. And I think people who are familiar with immigration processes understand how people who come here and, you know, there's an earned life in this nation or in a new language that is different than when you're born and it's automatic, you know? And so, and seeing that has, it was a nice thing to recognize with my mom's English, that actually it's hers, and she shared it with me and taught it to me.
You know, I wanted to ask, I have so much to say about language, but I'm like, okay, we want to move on, and we'll come back to it later. But I wanted to talk to Jaquira about Ordinary Girls. And thinking, you know, there was something someone put in the chat, which is not the question I was going to ask you, Jaquira. I'm going to move because of this thing that came up in the chat where someone cited Maria's book, page 106, for those of you looking at her book, where she says something, how scary it is to act on freedom or with freedom. And I was thinking about Ordinary Girls, and like the sections I loved is when the girls in your book kind of went wild in their full selves. Even if the world didn't accept them, they kind of accepted each other, right? And there's a way that you once said that you write for them, not about them, but you're writing for them, you know? And I always thought about like how beautiful that was, because when I read the language that you have for these girls that you grew up with, like, it's so loving. There's so much love there, right? Even if it's complex and tense and all of those things. So do you want to speak on writing memoir? I think there's a number of people here who are writers, and all of you actually, like Quiara, I know that you're also writing very intimate things around your families and your communities, like all of you. what you've learned in this process?
Oh, thank you. I think part of what I learned was that I wasn't just writing about my community, that I was writing for them, that was more important to me than anything else, that I was writing from within a community that was marginalized, but also that didn't really have a place in, what we call mainstream, the literary landscape. No one really was writing books about people like us that were for us. And that's one of the things that I learned, not just that I wanted to write about my community, but that I wanted to write for them. And I feel like I keep learning that again and again. I keep thinking about that, and it keeps recurring and coming back to me in some ways. After I finished the book and I had my first event in Miami, I invited all of the girls who are now women in the book, all of my friends, those who are still alive, and I invited them to the launch party. And for most of them, it was the first time that they'd heard me read passages where they appear in the book. And one of my friends, who was one of my very best friends when I was growing up, came up to me after the reading and said, "You really wrote about us, like you wrote about our Miami." And she was so surprised. But also one of the things that she said to me that I still think about is she said, "They don't write books about people like us." I feel like I'm gonna cry, but it made me so emotional because that's literally what I felt growing up, looking for myself in books, looking for people like us, looking for, Black and brown girls who were bilingual, who were from working class families, who were from El Caserío, who were from working class communities, who grew up in poverty. I felt like we didn't exist in literature. And it wasn't until I read, I've said this a bunch of times, but it wasn't until I read Esmeralda Santiago's when I was Puerto Rican that I picked up a book that was written in English. And I thought, oh my God, we exist in the American books, like we exist. And it was a revelation. It felt like permission, but it also felt like she was writing for me. And so I feel like all the language that I have in the book, it comes naturally because I think about my girls as my audience, but also like my family. It feels very much like they saved me then, but like they continue to save me as I'm writing about our time. Just thinking about them and remembering that they still live in a world where they feel like they don't write books about people like us. And it's certainly, when they do, it's not for us. It's for a white gaze. It's for a very different audience. And they don't do it from a place of generosity or understanding. They don't do it from within the community. So I feel like it feels like what we're doing now, just having these conversations and talking about each other's books and reading each other's books and being at an event together, that feels revolutionary. My God.
Can I just say that invisibility is actually bad for your mental health? Like, it's been scientifically proven that if you feel invisible, it's actually really bad for you. And if you all think you had it bad, I'm just saying, okay? Because I don't want to be having to say how many more decades I've been around. I'm just saying that when we got a copy of Eva Luna, or Casa de los Espíritus, I can't remember which one, we got it from Chile and somebody had actually brought it up and we were passing it amongst that was we were finally reading a Latin American writer that was modern. And that felt as revolutionary as this does, because I do think that this is the kind of thing that there are young writers or older writers who will say like, okay, I got to write. By the way, I just want to reiterate again, it's not to say that, I would say we're afraid most of the time, those of the writers who are here. My favorite quote that I've recently come upon is from Georgia O'Keeffe, whose paintings I love and adore. And she said something to the effect of, "I'm terrified every single day of my life, but that's never stopped me from doing what I have to do." And I'm just like, yeah.
I love that quote. Is so, I just want to take notes on everything that everyone is saying. I'm just writing it all down in my little notes app on my phone. I wanted to move the conversation along a little bit to some audience questions because we've gotten so many great questions in the Q&A box. First one is from Erica Renal, who says, when writing a memoir, how do you handle how your story will be perceived from family and friends? I find that the most difficult in telling my story. How do you remain respectful while also telling your truth? Such a good question. Who wants to take this one? Jaquira, go ahead.
I'll be very quick. So one of the things that I was thinking about, because I'm writing about people, obviously people who are real, who are still in my life, I think the thing to always keep in mind is, why are you writing this story, right? Are you writing a memoir just for the sake of confessing something, or is there a larger story? Are you trying to speak to something larger? But also, can you face every one of the people that are in your book? Like, can you realistically face them and say, yes, I wrote about you and I'm ready for whatever the consequences may be? Can you honestly look them in the face? For me, that was the test. Like, I don't feel like I have to ask permission, but I do feel like I want to be able to live with myself, and how much I reveal, rather than just being, confessional for the sake of confessing something, has to serve a larger purpose. I want a memoir, personal essay, whatever I'm writing, I want my narrative to speak to something larger, and to connect to a community for a purpose. And I also want to be able to look my friends and family in the face and feel like I haven't stolen their story. Like, they have a right to their own, stories, to live their lives with dignity and grace. And I don't want to be the one to take that away from them. So I think being able to look them in the face for me is like a test. Can I look my father in the face and say, yes, I wrote this? And can I tell them what I'm writing without them wanting to sue me?
Anyone else want to share before we move to the next question?
I always tell writers to let yourself write the book that you need first, and then you can worry about everyone else later. As you make your way through what you actually want in that final draft. And I shared parts of my memoir with people who were, friends and exes to not necessarily to get their permission, but actually to get their perspective. I was curious about how my memories matched up with theirs. So I felt like it was a really kind of beautiful collaborative process in a lot of ways. And it's also always surprising to me, like, you think you know how people are going to feel about being included in your book or being a part of it, and then you really don't know. My sister wanted to know why there wasn't a chapter about her basically in the book. And meanwhile, I thought she would have hated that, so you don't know. I recently talked to a writer who has been trying to get one of her siblings to lay off and back up, and she started to basically write a memoir and told this sibling, and now the sibling has stopped calling her, so you just don't know how your family members are going to react. Something I remember that Maria told us, I don't know if it was back in that meeting, but was also like protecting the privacy of certain family members. And that really stayed with me as well. Like, really being conscientious about who in your community and your family is vulnerable in certain ways. So I don't know, that just stayed with me. Thanks.
I'm gonna first, I want to remind the audience that the entire reason we started Gran Combo was to make sure that we keep supporting our small bookstores. I think people are becoming really comfortable, and supposedly it's the statistics are coming back that Amazon is taking back their book selling empire, and small bookstores are now being forgotten. And it's so important as the city starts opening up and things start opening up that we continue supporting our local bookstores. And if you can, there's so much reason why you should be buying the books from the writers that are here. And if you can't buy them, you could go to the library and ask for them, and you can go and if you could go to the bookstores and ask why those books aren't there. bookstores that are not, that are in your community might not have these books. It's really, really important. So I just want to remind everyone that this is an important thing to do. Okay, the next question is Natalie Lima. She asked a question, and I'm going to open up this question a little bit. Her question was, how do you approach writing about your ethnic identity if you don't feel Latinx enough, whatever that may mean? But in general, like I think as writers, like when we don't feel enough of something, like when do we give ourselves permission? I use this as Jen says this in her book, like the moment you give yourself permission to write about a thing, even though you don't feel like an expert, right? Which again goes back to language and all these other things. So who wants to answer? Jen, maybe I pointed you out. Or do you have? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think writing into those spaces is great. You've given yourself a prompt, in some ways. It's so, writing is complicated, right? It's like there's so many emotions involved in it on a given day. And I think I've learned to trust the process, to just show up. And I really do feel like my ancestors do help me. I also feel like I'm less of a producer writing for a consumer as I am a kind of channel for a story that also works through the reader, because it's something that needs to be shared. And I didn't start out like that. I was like, I want to write a book by the time I'm 25. I had like my goals, and I was like, this is what it's going to look like, and this is how it's going to be. And it's like, yeah, no, that's not happening. But it took a long time. And I really feel like once I surrendered to those spaces and those questions, I felt like I finally started writing into some truths. And it's hard because they're the ugly family secrets and the feelings we don't want to maybe acknowledge within ourselves, never mind put on the page to be in bookstores worldwide, all that. And I think I'll say this for myself, I feel conditioned culturally to kind of hide those stories and don't air the dirty laundry and, ¿qué va a decir la gente? Like all of that, just like be quiet and be grateful and stay in your and get straight A's and we'll be good, and it was like, that is how you're supposed to live your life. And then being an artist, being a writer in the family is just, it's a whole different thing. And that's why I really felt strongly about writing about that, because I wanted to lift the curtain kind of. And I didn't know any writers, and even in Macondo working with Sandra, I know that like in her high-pitched voice, I can just hear her being like, everything has an energy. Write about the ombligo of the tree, write about anything, and I'm like, I can do that. I can write about anything, but my mom will be mad at me, and she's like, oh no, that's okay. So I think like permission is huge. And I'm going to put in the chat, take my class at Hugo House on Wednesday. It's about writing about culture and ethnicity. So there you go.
Ariana, you want to ask the next question?
Yes. So this is a fun one from Lupita. She said, it's not a Gran Combo unless somebody sings. Just kidding. You don't need to sing, but speaking of music, if you could each pick one song to represent your book, which would it be and why? This is such a fun one. We could add these songs to the playlist at the end. Who has a song that
singing is permitted. Singing is permitted. Just a kick.
Or even if it's a song that doesn't represent your book, but I would also love to hear if anyone has songs or music that they love to listen to while they write. That's another, I always am, as a writing nerd, like to hear that.
All right, so this song that I would say, given that you all opened tonight with Mercedes Sosa, so thank you for that. The song that I might say represents Once I Was You is Cambia Todo Cambia, which is a beautiful song and that also came to me 24 hours after my best friend took her last breath and I was holding her hand, Cecilia Weissman, Argentinian. Y'all saw me dancing to Billy Robina because I'm married to Herman Perez, the artist, right behind me. And, we danced merengue at our wedding 30 years ago. Yeah, we've been married 30 years. And some of you are like, wait, I'm not even 30. Yeah, I know. What I ended up, let's see, when I was writing Once I Was You, what was I listening to? I can't remember, but I just wrote another version and I've been listening to hypnotic music, binaural beats. Oh, I was listening to lo-fi hip hop. That's what I was listening to. So it's not a soundtrack, but I would go into a meditative state and have lo-fi hip hop in my ears. So yeah, music is an essential part of allowing me to open up and be a little bit less afraid. But that's not what I dance to. What I write to is not what I dance to.
Who else? Jaquira, you're
I'm
up.
I'm gonna go. I'm not gonna sing, but so the soundtrack to my book changes as I change. So this is, I think, Juan Gabriel, Querida. Can y'all hear it? Okay, I'll stop there. But that's just for now. And maybe the DJ will play that later and we can all break into song.
Well, my book is a lot of music in it. I actually made a playlist that's on Tidal. It's public. It's open to the public. And someone already, it started with a chapter on Bachata Rosa. So, you know, there's that. There's Chopin Nocturne in B flat minor, which was like 100% of my adolescent depression, like filtered itself through that piece. There's a lot of influence from my mom's music that she listened to as part of her practice. So a personal favorite was like Selena y Reutilio, Que Viva Chango. You all know that, right? Que viva Chango, que viva Chango, que viva Chango, que viva Chango, señores. All right.
Celia Cruz, come on. That's like, yeah.
And she had another beautiful song for Chango. Chango ta veni, Chango ta veni, Chango ta veni. That one we had on vinyl.
And of course, Celia, when people would ask, are you initiated? She'd say, bueno, no, o sea, she always evaded the question, you know, and everybody was still, oiga, ¿y usted la religión como que es iniciado? Bueno, mucho respeto. It's just like, que viva Chango, you know. Yeah.
But if you watch her sing, if you see her live, she was elevated. She was elevated. She was an elevated spirit, you know, whatever formalities or initiation or, you know, steps had been taken, that's one thing, but she was elevated and she walked that path, you know, whatever it was called.
Let me tell you, she was elevated even in her deathbed. I was there. I was one of those people who happened to be at Franklin Funeral House reporting on it for CNN. And so I was inside. Hasta allí, ella estaba in una plana, all dressed in white, and she was elevated. It was like, oh my God, it was incredible. And you know, people were dancing outside, right, in order. That was the whole thing, is that as people were waiting to go in and pay their last respects, everybody was dancing. And the people of CNN is like, we don't understand this. Like, are you sad or are you dancing? What the hell? And they actually, esta boba actually asked me to dance salsa. In that moment, that was when I was like, I have to leave this network. She was like, "Ay, Maria, can you dance a little for us?" Kira Phillips, she actually said, live, I'm at Celia Cruz's funeral home. And she's like, hey, so everybody's down. Can you show us your moves, Maria? And I was like, help me. That actually happened.
That is like an SNL skit, literally. It's like,
if they had Latino or Latina writers, then it would be. I'm on an SNL dump right now. I'm like, why should I even care about y'all? I'm sorry. Don't get me started.
Carolina de Robertis wants to come on live and ask a question. She's one of the originals, you know, OGs of the El Gran Combo.
The icon.
Hola.
Hola. Oh, Hello, this is incredible. Hello, everyone. Thank you for all of your brilliance today. Muchísima luz, so many incredible words. I actually love every single one of your books. I have a few of them here, so I just want to make clear, everybody, buy these books, buy them from these stores. They are just phenomenal and transcendent. White Space and Ordinary Girls too. They're just somewhere in there.
Before you say anything, for those of you in the audience who still don't know who Carolina de Robertis is, she's the author of Cantoras and a new book that's coming out, The President and the Frog, that everyone should get as well. So I just want, we can't just assume they know us. We know each other. But...
Oh, Shakira, you got the new book. It's just, literary familia and literary community, approaching the literary world as community and as community weaving is so powerful and gives me life, and all of your work gives me life. But so I am going to have a question. Maria said something so brilliant, which is so like her, pointing out that I wrote it down, invisibility is bad for your mental health. Like, it's actually scientifically proven. And I think that's a very profound thing. And I think, many of us, whether it's as writers in the publishing world or in what, or just navigating the world, deal with and grapple with invisibility. And then you just told the story about CNN and Celia Cruz and this question that came at you, Maria. So there's like an illustration, right there to go with your point. So what are the things that you do to cultivate like radiant, deep well-being in the face of these dynamics of erasure, And
I can give you a quick, let me just give you a quick list, because I meditate every day, and I learned that from Lidia Cacho. If you don't know who Lidia Cacho is, look her up. She's an extraordinary Mexican journalist who was defending girls who were being sexually trafficked in Mexico by politicians, and then she gets sexually assaulted in the process, and she's the one who turns me on to meditation. I'm like you, I was like, I'll never meditate. No, that's what I do. I connect to nature as much as I can. And if you follow me on Instagram, you know exactly what I do. I'm out there boxing at 7 o'clock in the morning, every morning here in Harlem. If you're in Harlem, join us. And it's not just boxing, it's a group of people that we love life. And so we're dancing at 7 a.m. We bring speakers, we're making a party. And that's what it's been like in the pandemic. The truth is that I feed off of people and humanity and actually hugging people. And so I'm desperate to have that back. But those are the things and connecting to all of that is meant to connect to my ancestral roots, right? This is what my kids gave me they knew me so well. So lessons from plants, this is for Mother's Day, the hummingbird's gift, birds, and my man, Frederick Douglass. So yeah, and I'm telling you, sometimes I feel like I feel tremendous amount of guilt. How can I be feeling joy when I know that there's so much suffering and there are babies all these horrible things that are happening to our children. But we have to save our lives. We have to save our lives in order to be there for everybody else. So that's my short list.
Yeah, amazing.
Well, I love the wellness question, and I was struggling with that during the previous presidency more acutely than normal, because I think being an artist is exquisite and excruciating. And so I actually gathered, I have my own daily practices, my own specific meditations and prayers, my altars and stuff like that. But I convened a circle of Latina artists just in the name of wellness. So not networking, not a salon for our work, just a space of wellness. And that caught, so we met a few times a year, once, twice, 3 times a year for a few years. And I would love to do a national convening of Latina artists, just a space of wellness to share strategies, be in community, build each other up. I think it'd be super fun. And then we can all jot down our daily practices, and that could be the book, the zine that we send everyone off with. So yeah. putting that out there. I'm saying it out there now.
The book
Let's just do it.
zine.
Let's do it.
Done. It's done. Let's do it.
We'll start the Google Doc.
So I'm gonna jump in and talk a little bit about my wellness practice. So I just got married in August, and I've been having a shit ton of sex. That's what I've been doing.
I was gonna add that on to mine, but I didn't want to be too, but yes, bravo. Mother's Day every weekend is what I'm saying about, no. Completely, especially if you're a survivor, and all of what's taken from us when we have to fight for our survivors. So thank you, Jaquira. Like, órale pues, bravo, eso.
You stole the shine, Jaquira. I was gonna be like, I take baths with candles, but sex is way better. So I think someone was gonna come on camera to ask their question. Who was next?
I don't know. I can't tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell in the chat.
Why don't we ask one of Victoria's question? Do you want to ask it, Ariana?
Yes. And Carolina, thank you so much for sharing your question. It was such a good one. Victoria A has a question for Maria. She wants to know when your AOC interview is airing. If you want to answer that, quickly, because we want the tea. And
I think next week. I think next week. But let me tell you, it was epic. First in-person interview that I've done since the pandemic. For her, it was the first in-person, certainly in 2020. And I know it looked all beautiful and everything, but if you followed my Twitter, actually it's deep. I don't even want to cry, but that's how deep it was. There's a lot of trauma there for our compañera, because just for being who she is, which is a lefty, progressive, outspoken Puerto Rican woman from the Bronx, people want to kill her. And we have to all of us who are here have to kind of understand what that, like, we do what we do and it's scary and all that. A ella la querían matar, la querían ahorcar, and she has to live with that alone, ultimately. It's a very existential thing. So thank you for asking. And I think it's going to be a pretty intense interview, actually. I think there's going to be a little bit of news there, so be sure you find it, yeah.
Oh, I can't wait for that. I remember your last interview with her on Latino USA. It was so good. So I'm like, this is the follow-up we've been waiting for. So thank you for sharing that. We'll be all tuned in. So I think Kiani wants to come in. Go ahead, Angie.
Yeah. Kiani Antigua wants to come up, and I would love for all of you to meet her. Antigua, Kiani, come up. Where are you? How do you show up? She has to show up.
Drum roll.
So Kiani Antigua is the translator of Dominicana, which is coming out in 2 weeks. And also a critically acclaimed Dominican writer who publishes in Spanish. But I don't know where she is. Will she come? Will it happen? I don't know. I guess not. Okay. I can't see the chat. Kiani Antigua. They can't find her. Okay. All right. Let's ask a quick question while she comes up. Are there any questions left?
There was one from Carmen Vela who said, when I read books by Sandra Cisneros, especially Caramelo, I related to the experiences, but not her words. Parentheses, her way of expressing those experiences. Have any of you experienced that? Very interesting question. I think the way that I'm reading the question is basically, maybe you didn't live the experience, or she related to the experience, but not the actual words. So maybe there was something that she recognized of herself in the book, even though that wasn't her exact way of experiencing it.
I don't know, because that's one of my favorite books. It's up there in the top 10. I just love it. And I think I had the opposite feeling. So I'm like,
Well, the thing is, I think the pressure of, right, so because you're Latinx or you're defined in a certain way, that if someone gives you a book that someone feels like you have to relate to it, right? Or it has to speak to you very closely, or it has to speak in the language that you're working in. But what I find wonderful, one of the privileges of being immigrant and being an outsider of culture, is that I never read books for relatability. None of the books that were given to me throughout my childhood were books I could relate to. I had to find a way into the books, right? And I feel like there is kind of a training that there is in education here in America, particular, because everyone around the world is constantly reading in translation, is that we're taught that you have to relate to a book. But in actuality, to read outside of your experience is something we're constantly doing, because we're code switching and moving across the boundaries that exist, or the borders that exist for us. So I think that, what's interesting for me is that the writers that most influenced me were African-American writers. Like I would say my work is rooted in the African-American tradition in the United States, because that was my first education as a writer. And then I read the Chicanas, right? And the Chicanas felt very far away from me, because I grew up in urban New York City. And I was like, they were saying things that I cared about about language, like Gloria Zaldúa, my God, like, yes, I know that barbed wire, except I don't know that barbed wire, because my people came in the Yola, you know what I mean? Like, it was like a different experience. But I think it's interesting when there's such a desperation, like Jaquira was saying, to feel represented, that when we see a book, we're like, we wanted to tell our story because we're so desperate, right? But actually, it's very exciting to think about how all of our stories, there's overlaps. There's some overlaps, but also, like, what's exciting is how different we are. Aesthetically, what we care about, geographically, our influences, like everything from rock to jazz to all the different things that influence us as writers. So that's how I see the question as one, like the feeling I get is, wow, it is different, but thank God.
Yeah,
right.
I know we're here talking about nonfiction, but that's one of the reasons one of my biggest loves is fiction, is because I think, there's also the escape factor, and there's the fact of, I love that I'm seeing so many more Latinas in the romance genre and in the contemporary literature. Like, it doesn't all have to be trauma, and it doesn't always have to just be about the negatives of our experiences. It can also be, just wanting to escape into a story with characters who remind you of yourself, but aren't necessarily your exact same lived experience. So I think that there's so many layers in all of the reading that we do. And I agree with you, Angie, that it doesn't just have to be, you see yourself exactly as you are in the pages of a book.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that. I think our society is obsessed with categorizing people and things and art. And it's not always something that should be categorized and indexed. And, I just think I also love fiction, and I write fiction and for young adults. I want to write picture books. I want to write a memoir. I want to write more essays. I am a professor. I write academic pieces. It just feels like, why do we have to choose? And why are we being boxed so much? And there is such a pressure to represent an entire culture and people and ethnicity and country, even if, we never ask that of white writers. And it's just such a double standard. So I think that question is kind of pointing to this maybe pressure, like, okay, I need to love everything written by every Latino writer because I want to support and lift up this voice. But it doesn't mean that I relate to everything, or that even on an aesthetic level, I'm connecting on that level of style and language. But nor should we. I'm new at this in some ways, in the publishing and marketing aspect, and I'm already tired in a lot of ways, where it's like I'm seeing how it's very much where, well, how are we going to position this book? How are we going to sell this? So who are the readers for this? And like Jaquira was saying earlier, I'm writing about my community, but I'm writing for my community too. And I think it makes a marketer just want to tear their hair out, because it's like those sometimes, right? It's like, well, like Angie last year was like, I want to put books in this, what was that amazing program where they were delivering food to families? Yeah. And then you put books inside the brown paper bags of food, because books feed people, and I don't think other communities would think of that, in that same way. And I think audiobooks are huge in Latinx communities. there's just so much to say about the marketing and publishing side, but that question kind of like hit that nerve.
I want to, so it's 9:30, it's past 9:30. We should close. I just want to say, the last thing I want to say is that, especially with this question about what books should we buy, how we should support, you know, I think we should read widely and vastly, but when it comes to our money, our community, there is a lack of representation in mainstream media. This is statistically have been proven in the movies, in the TV, in books. If you're going to spend, I say, borrow the books by the white boys, buy the books by the Latinx. You know what I mean? You know, like stream the movies by whatever Whitelandia world you want to escape to, but go and buy tickets to go see In the Heights, June 11th, Quiara Alegria Hudes. I'm going to be there. I don't know how, but I'm going. In the Heights is out. It's so important we support each other and like show up, because even though you're going to love it, even if it's not like your cup of tea, let me tell you something, that is a gateway to other movies being made. Every book that gets published and gets on the New York bestseller list, New York Times bestseller list, creates a possibility for another book to come out. And that is just a fact. This is capitalist country and they care about dollars. And if we're not supporting with the money we got, our communities and the stories we want to see out there, it's not going to happen. There's no way it's going to happen. So I'm just saying, and this is true about our bookstores. This is true about the books that we're making. This is about the movies. Like I said, borrow the books by the white boys, buy the books by our community. This is the new rule. Spread the word. Thank you, everyone. And leave amazing, Ariana. Could we take this on the road?
Yes.
What?
No, sorry, I was adding, and also leave reviews. Leave reviews for all of the authors and all the books that you read. That's so important. And often I don't think people realize how important it is to just leave well, we're not talking about Amazon. Leave a review wherever non-Amazon place you
Even Amazon, it doesn't matter. Leave a review. It doesn't cost you anything to review a book. Like you could review a book that you didn't even buy on Amazon, actually. Just review it and tell people about it and buy it for your mommies. And one of the things like, you know, especially translations, for example, they're very hard to, like a lot of our books are translated into Spanish, but a lot of the people that are the audiences for those books are not on social media. So it's really important too, like to use our word of mouth to tell our tias and mothers and sisters like that, I want those books in translation for that art, so we could have intergenerational conversations. Because I think that's really, I know Once Was You is translated. My book is being translated. I think Carolina, your book has just been translated. Jaquira, have you been translated? Your book is translated. My Broken Language, I'm sure will be translated. Ariana, like it's just so exciting to think that all the generations could start talking to each other about the things that we're talking about in our books. So that's it. Gracias.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you everyone for joining us. This was so much fun. I hope everyone has a great week.
And I don't know if Veronica or somebody in Word Up or somebody in one of these bookstores want to close the evening. Did we just like, hello? Yes.
We're here.
We're here.
Just kind of like, by this conversation that's been incredible. It feels like such an honor. I think I can speak on behalf of all of the, we can speak on behalf of all the bookstores. If other bookstores want to come back on too and say hello if you're there. Thank you so much for all of this goodness of the past hour and a half. And what Angie and all of the other authors have said, please consider where your dollars go in supporting the bookstores and the small businesses and all the things in your community that you want to see exist and continue to exist in your community.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Gracias.
There's no music to end. I thought it was DJ Boy. He was going to give us a little, you know.
Yeah.
Where's DJ Boy?
Oh, wait,
No
is
music?
this when I'm supposed to be dancing now? Because I made a promise that I would dance.
What happened to the music?
Oh, well, I gotta go. There's no music.
All right. Okay. Buenas noches. Let's go.